Cops harassed black single mom at traffic stop. Didn't know her brother is a Delta Force commander. Her body ached from standing for hours, attending to patients who needed her constant attention. As a single mother, every shift was more than just a job. It was a responsibility to provide for her two children, to make sure they had everything they needed. Tonight, like many others, she had left the hospital feeling exhausted but determined. She wanted nothing more than to get home, see her kids sleeping peacefully, and finally rest. The streets were quiet as she drove, the city seeming almost empty in the early morning. Streetlights cast pools of yellow on the asphalt, and the occasional car passed by, headlights briefly illuminating the darkened streets. Monique kept her eyes on the road, hands steady on the steering wheel, and her mind replayed the events of the night. She thought about the patient she had helped stabilize, the mother she had comforted during a frightening emergency, and even the small smile a child had given her, a reminder that her work mattered. As she approached an intersection, she noticed a stop sign. She slowed down, came to a complete stop, and checked for any oncoming traffic. Satisfied that the road was clear, she gently pressed the accelerator and moved forward. It was a routine action, one she had performed countless times before. She felt a sense of relief knowing she was following the rules, especially after a long and tiring shift. But just as she merged into the lane, she saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart jumped. A police cruiser was signaling for her to pull over. Monique's stomach tightened. She was no stranger to law enforcement interactions, but she had always tried to avoid unnecessary attention. She carefully steered her car to the side of the road, her hands slightly trembling as she turned off the engine. The hum of the tires on the asphalt seemed louder than usual, and the night felt suddenly heavier. Two officers approached her car, their expressions serious. "License and registration, please," one of them said, his voice firm but not aggressive. Monique complied immediately, handing over the documents with a polite nod. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel as she had been taught. She wanted to show that she was cooperative, that she had nothing to hide. The officers examined her documents for a moment before glancing back at her. One of them stepped closer to the window. "Do you know why we pulled you over?" he asked. Monique shook her head. "No, sir," she replied softly. "I thought I stopped at the sign back there." "I was careful," the officer frowned. "You may have, but we need to verify a few things." His tone carried an edge that made Monique uneasy. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Every second seemed to stretch longer than it should. She could sense a judgment in their eyes, a suspicion she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just about the stop. It felt personal, as if she were being measured against a standard she had no control over. Monique's mind raced. She reminded herself to stay calm, to breathe slowly. Her training from various community workshops came to mind, how to interact with law enforcement respectfully while protecting herself. She kept her voice steady as she answered questions, giving clear, concise responses. She felt a mix of anxiety and frustration. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, her life temporarily held up at the side of the road by strangers in uniform. The officers asked more questions, some of them seemingly unnecessary. "Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Who else is in the car with you?" Monique answered politely, providing only the essential information. She noticed a shift in their behavior, small hints of impatience and skepticism. One of the officers leaned slightly closer, peering into the car. "You live around here?" he asked. Monique nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Yes, just a few blocks away." As the minutes passed, Monique felt a growing tension in her chest. She thought about her children at home, sleeping under the soft glow of their nightlight, unaware that their mother was being subjected to this stressful situation. She imagined their little faces, hoping that by the time she returned, everything would be calm again. She reminded herself that she was a responsible adult, that she had done nothing to provoke this encounter, yet the feeling of vulnerability lingered. The night air was cool, brushing against her face through the slightly open window. She could hear the distant hum of the city, the faint sound of traffic, the occasional dog barking, a car door slamming somewhere in the distance. These sounds, ordinary in another context, seemed amplified in her heightened state of awareness. Every small noise made her flinch slightly, and every shadow passing by the streetlights felt heavier than it should. Monique reflected on her life as a single mother. She had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable at times, balancing work, parenting, and her own personal needs. She had learned resilience, patience, and the importance of staying calm under pressure. Yet, despite all her experience, she felt a twinge of fear she could not shake. There was an unfairness in being judged so quickly, in being presumed guilty without cause. The officers continued their questioning, occasionally exchanging glances. Monique noticed the subtle ways they tested her, pauses in their speech, slight changes in tone, the way they repeated questions. She realized that their behavior was a reflection of their authority, a reminder of the power they held in this moment. She chose to remain polite, to avoid confrontation, and to assert herself only when necessary. Her voice remained steady, her words measured, but inside her mind was racing. Finally, one of the officers spoke again, his tone slightly softer but still formal. "We just need to make sure everything is in order. Please remain in the car while we verify your information." Monique nodded, staying seated with her hands visible on the steering wheel. She could feel the adrenaline slowly coursing through her veins, her body tense and alert. The wait felt longer than it should have, each second stretching into an eternity as she tried to remain composed. During the silence, Monique thought about the countless other black mothers she knew who had faced similar encounters. She thought about how common it was to feel scrutinized simply because of the color of her skin, about the moments of fear and uncertainty that seemed to follow her in certain spaces. She reminded herself that she was strong, capable, and deserving of respect. She breathed deeply, grounding herself in the knowledge that this situation would eventually end. As the officers walked back to their cruiser with her documents, Monique felt a small surge of hope. Perhaps the ordeal would soon be over. Perhaps she would be free to continue her journey home without further incident. She focused on the thought of her children, the warmth of her home, and the comfort of her own space. She imagined walking through the door, hearing their laughter, and feeling the tension of the night melt away. But even in that moment of hope, she remained cautious. She knew that anything could happen, that assumptions and misunderstandings could escalate quickly. She kept her hands visible, her body calm, and her mind alert, ready to respond appropriately if needed. Her years of experience navigating life's challenges had taught her that composure was a powerful tool, especially when facing situations beyond her control. Monique's heart pounded as the officers approached her car again. She straightened in her seat, taking another deep breath to steady herself. She reminded herself to speak clearly, to remain polite, and to assert her rights if necessary. Every instinct told her to stay calm, to stay aware, and to stay strong. She knew that this moment, like so many others, was a test of her patience, resilience, and courage. The night stretched on, quiet except for the soft sounds of the city. Monique's mind wandered to thoughts of family, work, and the small joys that made life meaningful. She reflected on the sacrifices she had made as a single mother, the nights spent awake with sick children, the early mornings rushing to work, and the constant effort to provide a stable, loving environment for her family. These thoughts strengthened her resolve, reminding her of the importance of staying composed and strong in the face of adversity. And so she waited, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes alert, her mind focused. The encounter had already shaken her, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. She reminded herself that she was capable, that she was prepared, and that she deserved to be treated with respect. Every breath she took was a small act of courage, a quiet assertion of her dignity in a world that often tested it. The night air pressed against Monique Harris as she remained in her car, her hands still resting on the steering wheel. The officers had gone back to their cruiser, but she could see them through her rearview mirror, talking quietly in low voices, occasionally glancing in her direction. The unease in her chest had not lessened. If anything, it had grown heavier. Every moment of waiting felt like an eternity, and every sound of tires on the pavement or distant voices made her flinch slightly. She wished she could disappear, to melt into the shadows and leave the fear and tension behind. Monique thought about her children. Her son Jamal was 10 years old, and her daughter Layla was only 6. They were both sleeping at home, completely unaware of the ordeal their mother was enduring. The thought of them gave her a mix of comfort and anxiety. Comfort because they were safe and asleep, anxiety because she wished she could be with them instead of in this tense, unpredictable situation. Her children had been her constant motivation, the reason she worked tirelessly and endured life's challenges. And now their image in her mind strengthened her resolve to stay calm. As she sat there, one of the officers approached her car again. This time, he leaned closer to her window, his expression slightly more serious than before. "Ma'am, we need to ask a few more questions," he said. Monique nodded gently. She had learned that nodding and maintaining a calm demeanor could sometimes ease tension. "Of course, officer," she replied politely. He began asking about her travel, where she was coming from, and why she was on the road at this late hour. Monique answered each question clearly, calmly, and honestly. She explained her long night shift at the hospital, the patients she had cared for, and her eagerness to get home to her children. Her words were straightforward, but she could sense a subtle skepticism in the officer's eyes. It was as if no amount of explanation could immediately convince him. "Do you live alone?" another officer asked, his tone sharp and probing. Monique hesitated slightly before answering. "Yes, I do. I live with my children," she said softly. She noticed the officer raised an eyebrow, as if her answer didn't meet his expectations. Monique felt a twinge of irritation but reminded herself to stay composed. Anger would only worsen the situation. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady the rapid beat of her heart. The officers then asked if there was anyone else in her family who could come to verify her story. Monique thought about her brother, Mark Harris, who lived several hours away. Mark had always been protective of her and her children. He had served in the military, rising through the ranks to become a Delta Force commander. The thought of her brother brought a small smile to her face, a reminder that she had family who cared deeply for her. But she kept this information to herself for now. She wasn't sure how revealing it would change the officer's behavior, and she wanted to avoid escalating the situation unnecessarily. The tension in the air was thick. Monique could feel the weight of the officers' gazes on her, as if they were looking for something she didn't have or wasn't aware of. Every movement she made was calculated. She kept her hands visible, her body relaxed but alert, her voice steady. She focused on controlling her breathing, grounding herself in the knowledge that panicking would not help. She reminded herself that she had the right to remain calm and composed, and that she had done nothing wrong. Minutes passed, each one stretching endlessly. The officers conversed quietly among themselves, sometimes glancing back at her car. Monique could sense their uncertainty. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but she noticed it. She wondered if her calm demeanor was confusing them, or if they were beginning to consider her words more seriously. She remained silent, knowing that saying too much could create misunderstandings. Silence, she realized, could sometimes speak louder than words. Suddenly, one of the officers made a comment about searching the car. "We might need to look inside," he said, almost casually. Monique felt a jolt of fear. She had heard stories of people being searched unnecessarily, of situations escalating far beyond what seemed reasonable. She knew she had rights, and she also knew the importance of asserting them respectfully. "I'm sorry, officer," she said firmly but politely. "I do not consent to a search. I'm happy to answer your questions, but I would like to keep my car private unless you have a warrant." The officer's expression hardened slightly. Monique could see that he was surprised by her response. Many people, she knew, would have complied without question, intimidated by the authority in uniform. But she had spent years learning to advocate for herself and her children, and she refused to let fear override her rights. She could feel her heart racing, but she focused on maintaining a calm exterior, showing confidence without aggression. The other officer exchanged a glance with his partner, a silent communication that Monique could sense even without understanding it fully. Their tone changed slightly, less sharp but still skeptical. They continued to ask questions, some more probing than before. Monique answered each one carefully, aware that her words were being scrutinized. She realized that the officers were testing her patience and composure, and she chose to meet that challenge with grace. During the questioning, Monique reflected on her life. She thought about the countless obstacles she had faced as a single mother, the nights she had stayed awake worrying about her children, and the days she had worked long hours to ensure they had everything they needed. She remembered times when people had doubted her abilities, assumed things about her, or judged her unfairly. She had learned resilience through these experiences, learning to navigate life's difficulties with determination and poise. Her thoughts also turned to her brother, Mark. She thought about his strength, his courage, and the way he had always been there to support her when she needed him. She had never needed him in a situation like this before, but the thought of his protective presence gave her a small sense of comfort. She reminded herself, however, that she could handle this moment on her own. She had faced challenges before and emerged stronger each time. This would be no different. The officer's questions continued, sometimes repetitive, sometimes oddly specific. Monique answered each one with care, avoiding any words or gestures that could be misinterpreted. She could feel the tension in the car, a mix of fear, frustration, and determination. She tried to focus on the ordinary details around her, the soft hum of the city, the gentle sway of the trees in the wind, the distant sound of a dog barking. These small, mundane things helped anchor her in reality, reminding her that the situation, while stressful, was temporary. At one point, the officers asked if she had any identification for her children or any proof of her residence. Monique explained that she did not carry such documents with her, but she offered alternative verification. "I can show you my hospital ID, my driver's license, and the insurance papers for my car. That proves I am who I say I am," she said. The officers examined the documents carefully, their expressions unreadable. Monique remained still, aware that every second of hesitation or doubt on her part could be noticed. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Monique's mind wandered to memories of her children laughing, of the small moments that made life beautiful. She thought about bedtime stories, shared meals, and quiet afternoons spent together. These thoughts gave her strength, a reminder that she was not alone and that her life had meaning beyond this tense encounter. She clung to these memories, using them as a source of calm in the midst of uncertainty. Finally, one of the officers spoke again. "Ma'am, we just need to verify a few final things. Please remain in your car." Monique nodded, taking another deep breath. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Her body was tense, her heart pounding, but she refused to let fear take control. She reminded herself that she had the right to be treated fairly and that she had done nothing wrong. Her patience, she knew, was as much a shield as it was a test of endurance. As she waited, Monique reflected on the broader reality of life for someone like her. She thought about the experiences of other Black mothers, the challenges they faced, and the resilience they displayed every day. She considered how quickly assumptions could be made, how easily fear and bias could influence interactions, and how vital it was to remain composed in difficult situations. She reminded herself that her calm demeanor, her measured words, and her quiet strength were powerful tools, capable of navigating even the most tense moments. Monique noticed subtle shifts in the officers' behavior. Their questions became slightly less probing, their tone less sharp. She realized that her calmness and confidence were having an effect. They were reassessing the situation, perhaps recognizing that she was not easily intimidated. She stayed alert, aware that the situation could change at any moment, but also cautiously hopeful that the encounter was moving toward a resolution. Minutes passed, each one feeling longer than the last. Monique continued to sit in her car, hands steady on the wheel, her eyes alert and her mind focused. She reflected on her life, her responsibilities, and the love she had for her children. She reminded herself that this experience, while stressful, was temporary, and that she had the strength to endure it with dignity and grace. And then, in the quiet moments between questions, she allowed herself a small sigh, a release of the tension she had been holding onto so tightly. She remained vigilant, but she also allowed herself a glimmer of hope. She had faced challenges before, navigated difficult situations, and emerged stronger. This moment, she realized, would be no different. Monique Harris's heart was still racing as the officers continued their questioning. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm waiting to break. She could feel her hands gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white, but she kept her face calm, her voice measured. She had learned long ago that showing fear only gave power to those trying to intimidate her. Still, every question felt heavier than the last, each word from the officers like a small push against her patience. Her mind wandered briefly to the day she had first learned to drive. She remembered her father teaching her, patient but firm, reminding her to always follow the rules and respect the road. That lesson had stayed with her, but tonight, the rules she followed faithfully seemed not to matter. The officers' faces, their focused gazes, their casual authority, it all reminded her that no matter how careful she was, she could still be judged unfairly. As the questioning continued, one officer suggested again that they might need to search her car. Monique's chest tightened. She had already stated her refusal, and she felt a small sense of dread that the situation could escalate further. "Officer," she said calmly but firmly, "I do not consent to a search. I am happy to answer your questions, but my vehicle is private unless there is a warrant." The officer paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, Monique thought she had angered him, that he might push further. But then he exchanged a glance with his partner, and there was a subtle shift in the air, a slight hesitation, a small recognition that she was not easily intimidated. Monique allowed herself to breathe a little easier, though she remained alert, knowing the situation could change in an instant. At that moment, her phone rang. The screen lit up, showing her brother, Mark. Monique's heart leapt. Mark rarely called at this hour, but she was glad to hear his voice. She answered softly, careful not to let the officers overhear too much. "Hey, Mark," she whispered. "I'm just on my way home from work." Mark's voice was filled with concern. "Monique, are you okay?" "You sound tired." She hesitated, then decided to mention the stop carefully. "I've been pulled over. They're questioning me. I'm fine, just tired." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mark's voice grew firmer, protective. "Do you want me to come there?" Monique shook her head even though he couldn't see her. "No, Mark, it's okay. I can handle it. They're just being difficult, I think." The officers, noticing her slight pause and quiet muttering, raised their eyebrows. One of them asked, "Who is that?" Monique's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to reveal too much, but she knew she had to respond carefully. "It's my brother," she said softly, keeping her voice steady. "We were just talking." The officer smirked slightly, clearly assuming it was just a casual family conversation. "Does your brother come pick you up when you get pulled over?" he asked sarcastically. Monique shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, sir. He lives far away." Mark's voice on the phone grew more serious. "Monique, tell me exactly what's happening," she explained briefly, making sure not to escalate the situation. "They stopped me for a traffic thing, and they're asking a lot of questions. I haven't done anything wrong, but they're being persistent." There was silence for a moment, then Mark said softly, "Stay calm, keep your hands visible, don't argue, just stay steady." His words were like a lifeline, grounding her, giving her a sense of calm amidst the chaos. Monique felt a wave of relief. Even though he wasn't there physically, knowing he was just a phone call away gave her strength. The officers noticed the conversation continuing. One of them, curious, asked, "What does your brother do?" Monique felt a small flicker of hesitation. She didn't want to brag, but she also didn't want to seem evasive. "He served in the military," she said cautiously, keeping her tone neutral. The officer's interest seemed piqued. "Military? What branch?" Monique chose her words carefully. "Special operations." "He's had a lot of experience." She didn't give too many details, sensing that the officers might not take her seriously. They assumed most people exaggerate. The conversation with her brother continued quietly, her words measured. Mark asked questions, reassured her, and guided her through remaining calm. "Remember, Monique, stay polite but firm. You're in control as long as you remain composed," he said. His voice, steady and commanding, reminded her of the confidence she had seen in him countless times. She realized how much his training and experience gave him a natural authority. As the officers continued their questioning, Monique noticed subtle changes in their demeanor. The tone of their questions was less sharp, more tentative. It was as if they were reassessing her, realizing that she was not an easy target, that she was composed and confident despite their attempts to intimidate her. Monique felt a small surge of pride. She had handled the situation with dignity so far, and her brother's presence, even over the phone, had helped her maintain control. Then, in a moment that surprised her, one of the officers leaned slightly closer. "Your brother's special operations, huh?" he said, his voice curious but cautious. Monique nodded quietly. She didn't give details, but she allowed her confidence to show. "Yes, he's experienced. He's also very protective of family." The officer glanced at his partner, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The casual sarcasm and bravado that had filled the conversation earlier began to fade. Monique could sense that they were now aware that she was not alone in facing this situation, that her family connections carried weight. The dynamic of the encounter was subtly shifting. Monique stayed calm, but she also felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had always known her brother's influence could provide protection if needed, but she had never been in a situation where it might be relevant. Now, it seemed that the knowledge of her brother's status was enough to make the officers reconsider their approach. The questioning continued, but the edge was gone. The officers still asked about her route, her work, and her family, but the tone had softened. There was less urgency, less skepticism, and more measured observation. Monique realized that her patience, composure, and careful words had started to work. She remained polite, answering questions clearly and concisely, never raising her voice, never showing fear. As she waited, she reflected on how quickly perceptions could change. Just moments ago, the officers had been assertive, almost aggressive, assuming the worst. Now, with subtle knowledge of her brother's background, their behavior was different. It reminded her how fragile assumptions could be, and how careful, composed responses could shift power dynamics even in stressful situations. Monique's thoughts also turned to the broader context of her life. She thought about the daily challenges she faced as a single mother, the ways she balanced work, parenting, and personal responsibilities. She considered the small victories that often went unnoticed. The nights she worked double shifts without complaint, the mornings she prepared breakfast for her children before rushing to work, the moments she spent quietly teaching them lessons about resilience and self-respect. These reflections gave her strength, a reminder that she had faced far greater challenges than a stressful traffic stop and had emerged stronger each time. Then, a subtle shift occurred. One of the officers approached the car and spoke more calmly. "Ma'am, everything seems to be in order. Thank you for your cooperation." Monique's chest felt lighter. Relief washed over her, but she remained alert, cautious not to let her guard down completely. She knew that patience and composure were still necessary until she was safely back on the road. As the officers prepared to leave, Monique allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She had handled the encounter with dignity, asserting her rights calmly and maintaining composure despite the tension. The presence of her brother, even indirectly, had provided her with an added sense of security and confidence. It reminded her that family support, experience, and preparation could be powerful tools in navigating life's challenges. After the officers finally returned to their cruiser and drove away, Monique exhaled slowly. Her hands relaxed on the steering wheel, and she allowed herself to take a deep, grounding breath. The tension that had gripped her body for what felt like hours began to ease. She started the car again, carefully merging back onto the road, her mind still alert but her heart lighter. As she drove toward home, she reflected on the events of the night. The fear and tension she had felt were real, but so was her resilience. She thought about how she had remained composed, polite, and firm, and how those qualities had shifted the dynamic of a situation that could have escalated. She thought about her brother, his guidance, and his protective influence, and felt gratitude for the bond they shared. Finally, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The night had been difficult, filled with tension and uncertainty, but she had faced it with courage and dignity. She had been tested, yet she had remained in control, proving to herself that even in the most stressful circumstances, she could rely on her strength, her composure, and the support of her family. Monique continued driving, the city gradually waking around her as the first hints of morning light appeared on the horizon. She thought about her children, imagining them waking up, their laughter filling the home. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that no matter the challenges she faced, she had the resilience and determination to navigate them successfully. Monique Harris drove slowly down the familiar streets of her neighborhood, the early morning light beginning to creep. Over the horizon, the city was waking up, but the streets were still quiet, almost peaceful, which contrasted sharply with the tension she had experienced just moments ago. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel, but she could still feel the lingering adrenaline, a reminder of how quickly ordinary life could turn stressful. She thought about the traffic stop, the officers, and the phone call with her brother, Mark. The events of the night replayed in her mind, each moment etched vividly, each feeling sharp and real. Even though the officers had finally left, Monique knew that the experience would not leave her immediately. Her chest still felt tight at times, and her mind kept revisiting the questions, the subtle glances, and the intensity of their presence. She realized that encounters like these were more than just inconveniences. They were reminders of the constant vigilance required in her life as a Black single mother. She had learned to navigate challenges with patience and composure, but tonight had reminded her just how fragile a sense of safety could feel. As she approached her home, the familiar sight of her modest, well-kept house brought a sense of comfort. The little yard with its carefully planted flowers, the small porch where she often sat in the evenings, and the soft glow of the nightlight through the window. All of it felt like an oasis after the stress she had endured. Her thoughts shifted immediately to her children. She imagined their sleepy faces, the warmth of their small hands in hers, and the gentle sound of their breathing. She longed to hold them, to reassure herself that they were safe and that everything was back to normal. Pulling into the driveway, Monique turned off the engine and sat in the quiet for a few moments. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her body. The familiar surroundings provided a grounding effect, a sense of stability that she had missed during the stop. She reminded herself to take things slowly, to transition from the high alertness she had maintained throughout the night to a calmer, more relaxed state. The ordeal had been intense, but she had survived it with dignity and composure. Walking up the steps to her porch, she thought about the lessons she had learned in the past few hours. One of the most important was the power of patience. Remaining calm, polite, and measured in her responses had helped her navigate a situation that could easily have escalated. She realized that her own confidence and knowledge of her rights had been key to maintaining control. Even when fear and frustration threatened to take over, she had stayed grounded. This realization filled her with a quiet sense of pride. Opening the door, Monique was greeted by the comforting scent of her home. Freshly brewed coffee, faint traces of vanilla from a candle she had lit the night before, and the subtle warmth that came from a place lived in and cared for. The familiar surroundings immediately calmed her further. She could hear the faint rustling of her children beginning to stir, their small voices calling out as they sensed her presence. Her heart lifted, and a smile spread across her face. No matter the difficulties she faced outside, her home was a place of love, safety, and connection. Jamal and Layla ran toward her as she entered, their small bodies tumbling into hers in a rush of hugs. "Mommy!" they exclaimed in unison. Monique held them close, breathing in their familiar scent, feeling the warmth and comfort of their presence. The fear and tension from the traffic stop began to melt away, replaced by the profound relief of being with her children. She had endured a stressful and intimidating encounter, but now she was back in her safe space, surrounded by the people who mattered most. As she settled the children down for breakfast, Monique reflected further on the events of the night. She thought about the subtle but powerful shift that had occurred when her brother was mentioned. The officers had initially been assertive, testing her, trying to assert control. But the knowledge of her brother's experience in special operations and his protective nature had changed the dynamic. It was a reminder of the unexpected ways life could influence even ordinary situations. While she had managed on her own through composure and clarity, the indirect support from family had strengthened her position. Monique also thought about the broader implications of the encounter. She knew that many people, especially mothers like her, faced similar situations where assumptions, biases, or misunderstandings could escalate quickly. The experience had reminded her of the importance of knowing her rights, maintaining composure, and relying on the tools she had learned over time to navigate such challenges. She made a mental note to share these lessons with her friends and community, to help others understand that calm, clarity, and patience could be powerful tools in moments of uncertainty. As breakfast concluded, Monique took a moment to enjoy the calm after the storm. She reflected on her resilience, recognizing the inner strength that had carried her through the tense traffic stop. The experience had been exhausting, yes, but it had also reinforced her confidence in herself. She had managed to stay composed under pressure, assert her rights respectfully, and navigate an unpredictable situation without escalating conflict. These were skills she had cultivated over years of facing personal and professional challenges, and they had served her well tonight. Monique also considered the role of family support in her life. Her brother's presence, even from a distance, had been reassuring. It reminded her that she was not alone, that she had people who cared deeply for her and her children. The bond she shared with Mark had been strengthened by years of mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences. That connection had provided not only emotional support, but also a sense of security that allowed her to remain confident in a moment of uncertainty. Later, as the children played quietly, Monique sat by the window, looking out at the street where the incident had occurred. She reflected on how ordinary life could suddenly present challenges that tested patience, courage, and composure. She thought about how people often underestimated the importance of emotional control in difficult situations. Her experience tonight had demonstrated that even when circumstances felt intimidating or unfair, maintaining clarity and calm could lead to a positive resolution. Monique also recognized the importance of sharing her story. While the incident had been frightening, it had also been educational, both for her and potentially for others. She considered how telling her experience could help raise awareness about the subtle dynamics at play in law enforcement interactions, about the power of composure, and about the value of family support. By sharing her story, she could help others navigate similar challenges with confidence and dignity. As the morning progressed, Monique prepared her children for the day. She made them breakfast, packed their school bags, and ensured that they had everything they needed. The ordinary tasks of daily life felt comforting now, a grounding contrast to the tension of the night. She realized that resilience was not just about handling extraordinary situations, but also about finding balance and stability in everyday life. The small acts of care, responsibility, and attention to detail were part of the strength that had carried her through the night. Monique's thoughts returned once more to her brother. She reflected on the lessons she had learned from him over the years: courage, composure, and the importance of protecting and supporting family. These lessons had been invaluable tonight. While she had acted on her own initiative, the knowledge that she had someone as capable and experienced as Mark in her life had provided a layer of confidence that bolstered her composure. She understood now, more than ever, the subtle ways that family, guidance, and experience could shape one's ability to face challenges. By mid-morning, Monique felt a sense of closure. The immediate danger had passed, the officers were gone, and she was safely home with her children. The experience, while intense, had concluded without harm, and she had emerged with her dignity intact. She allowed herself to acknowledge the fear she had felt, the anxiety that had gripped her chest, and the tension that had dominated the encounter. Recognizing these feelings was important. It reminded her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act effectively despite it. Monique also thought about her role as a mother. She wanted her children to understand the value of patience, courage, and self-respect. She wanted them to see that even in challenging situations, it was possible to maintain composure, assert one's rights respectfully, and navigate difficulties without escalating conflict. The experience of the night would serve as a lesson, a story she could share with them when they were older about resilience, dignity, and the importance of inner strength. As the day continued, Monique felt a renewed sense of purpose. She recognized that life would continue to present challenges, but that she had the tools, knowledge, and support to face them effectively. She felt empowered by the experience, understanding that her actions, composure, and choices had shaped the outcome of the night. She realized that while fear and uncertainty were inevitable, they did not have to dictate her response. By the afternoon, Monique sat quietly in her living room, reflecting on the events and their lessons. She understood now that every challenge, no matter how intimidating, offered an opportunity for growth, learning, and resilience. She had faced fear, navigated tension, and emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own capabilities. The experience had tested her, but it had also reinforced her strengths. In the quiet of her home, surrounded by the warmth and love of her children, Monique felt a profound sense of peace. The ordeal was behind her, and she had handled it with grace, composure, and courage. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. The morning's events, once stressful and frightening, had transformed into a story of resilience, dignity, and empowerment. Monique glanced at the clock, realizing how much time had passed. She smiled softly, thinking about the calmness of her home, the laughter of her children, and the lessons learned from the night. Life was unpredictable, filled with moments of fear and uncertainty, but it was also filled with opportunities to demonstrate strength, courage, and grace. She felt ready to face whatever came next, confident in her ability to navigate life's challenges with poise and determination.